inspired. I felt enabled.
It wasn't just Yvonne, though. It was that whole group of choreographers at Judson Dance Theater who really were eschewing all of this rigidity. And I mean, they were all known for introducing pedestrian movement, you know, running, walking, just sitting and eating a sandwich as part of performance. And many of them, Yvonne included, would use non-professional performers in those early works. Oddly, they all kind of later in life, now that they're in their 70s and 80s, are all working with these highly trained dancers. And that's kind of a whole new, I think, epiphany.
That was documentary filmmaker Jack Walsh. Feelings Are Facts, The Life of Yvonne Rainer, can be seen on Saturday, June 9th at 8 p.m. on PBS 6+. There's a link to the schedule on the Spotlight page at acpm.org. The Tucson nonprofit Literacy Connects sponsors a group of performers and musicians called Stories That Soar. They help young writers realize the power and potential of bringing their stories to life. And we're presenting these stories on the first Thursday of every month here on Spotlight. This feel-good tale of acceptance and connection was written by Kimberly, a 5th grade student at Robeson Magnet School. It's called Rainbow Frog.
One day, there was a rainbow frog named Elijah. Elijah hung out with girl frogs and rarely hung out with boy frogs. But one day, Elijah saw a nice-looking boy frog. He wanted to be his friend. But there was one problem. The boy frog was crowded by other frogs. That made Elijah a little upset. But someone tapped on Elijah's back. He looked back and saw the nice-looking boy frog. Elijah stuttered his name, which made the frog laugh, which made Elijah smile, and they became friends. And years later, they started dating. The end.
That was Rainbow Frog, written by Kimberly, a 5th grader at Robeson Magnet School. Go Roadrunners. It was produced by the Stories That Soar creative team at Literacy Connects. Thank you for listening to Arizona Spotlight. This show is a production of AZPM. The music is by Calexico. The production engineer is Jim Blackwood. The assistant producer is Leah Britton. I'm producer and host Mark McLemore.
Communications. Join us.
No.
3 points.
I was shocked.
Introduce.
In Phoenix, we're at 75 now at 9 o'clock. Jalapeno growers have been breeding the heat out of the popular peppers. Southwest.
I were a chef at Macayo's here in the valley. I would want to make sure I had a source of peppers that not only were consistent, but had the level of spiciness that I wanted to bring to my food.
I'm Phil Lantzman sitting in for Lauren Gilger. Also today on the show, we'll revisit the form and function of LDS architecture. Preview summer reading with critic Mark Athatakis. And a discussion about the roots of drag culture.
In the 1850s, 1860s, 1870s, we start to see the rise of what will become the glamour queen of the late 1800s going into the early 1900s.
That and more on the show after a check of this hour's news.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Lakshmi Singh. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer says lawmakers will act quickly to pass bipartisan legislation that would raise the nation's debt ceiling. NPR's Windsor Johnston reports after much debate on the House floor last night, the legislation, which would lift the borrowing limit for the next 2 years, faces its next big test in the Senate.
With just days to go before the nation could run out of money to pay its bills, Majority Leader Chuck Schumer says the Senate will move quickly to pass the bill. Schumer says with a potential default on the line, lawmakers have no margin for error.
Either we proceed quickly and send this bipartisan agreement to the president's desk, or the federal government will default for the first time ever.
The legislation is expected to pass the Senate with bipartisan support, even though some Republicans and Democrats have threatened to vote against it. Without congressional action, the U.S. could default on its debt by as early as Monday. Windsor Johnston, NPR News, Washington.
Wall Street is tracking the compromise bill. NPR's Scott Horsley has more.
With the manufactured threat of a government default now receding, investors are focused on the underlying economy and the mixed signals coming from corporate earnings reports. Upscale retailer Nordstrom reported better than expected profits for the first quarter, while Macy's and Dollar General have cut their sales forecast for the year. Betting markets, which had expected the Federal Reserve to raise interest rates again this month, now think the central bank will leave rates unchanged in June. New claims for unemployment benefits inched up just slightly last week as some 232,000 people applied for jobless aid. The overall job market remains tight, with the Labor Department set to report on May's employment gains tomorrow. Scott Horsley, NPR News, Washington.
Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin has pledged to strengthen the U.S. alliance with Japan in order to meet shared security challenges. NPR's Anthony Kuhn reports from Seoul. Austin made a stopover in Tokyo en route to a defense forum in Singapore.
Austin and his Japanese counterpart Yasukazu Hamada criticized North Korea for the failed launch of its first spy satellite on Wednesday. Austin reassured allies of the U.S.'s commitment to defend them and urged stronger trilateral cooperation among the U.S., Japan, and South Korea. He also criticized what the U.S. considers China's aggressive intercept of a U.S. spy plane over the South China Sea last week. And he called unfortunate his Chinese counterpart Li Shangfu's refusal to meet him at the upcoming defense forum in Singapore. The U.S. sanctioned General Li 5 years ago for his role in purchasing Russian weapons. And therefore, Beijing says, the conditions for U.S.-China military dialogue are not in place. Anthony Kuhn, NPR News, Seoul.
The Dow is up more than 200 points. This is NPR News. Meta says it will block news articles from being shared in California if the state passes a bill now being debated there. A warning from the owner of Facebook and Instagram comes as lawmakers advance a bill forcing tech companies to pay publishers for content. Here's NPR's Bobby Allen.
It's called the California Journalism Preservation Act, and it would require that Facebook, Google, and other platforms, paid media companies, are making money by distributing their news stories. A similar measure passed in Australia and has generated some $150 million for news organizations, but only after Facebook briefly blocked news in the country and Google threatened to pull out its search engine. California is the first state to push a bill aimed at making tech companies pay news publishers, which have been in rapid decline since big tech began to dominate the online advertising market. If it passes and Meta follows through, it would be the first time the company blocked news stories in the U.S. Bobby Allen, NPR News.
In Iowa, Davenport police say 310 and 7 Iowa apartment building that partially collapsed 4 days ago are still unaccounted for. An engineer had previously flagged structural concerns with the 6-story building. The owner reportedly has been cited by the city for failing to ensure the safe and sanitary upkeep of the apartment building before the collapse. We're now into the 2023 Atlantic hurricane season. Forecasters say it could be a busy one, predicting 17 named storms, 9 hurricanes, and up to 4 major hurricanes. The Dow is up 183 points. You're listening to NPR News.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include the Lodestar Foundation, inspired by the principle that helping someone else less fortunate to a happier, healthier, and more meaningful life. Learn more at lodestarfoundation.org.
Good morning from KJZZ News in Phoenix. I'm Bruce Drummond. In Valley traffic right now, northbound I-17, we have a crash near Thunderbird Road. That one is blocking the right lanes there. The Bureau of Land Management will invest $161 million in ecosystem restoration projects throughout the western U.S. And as KJZZ's Ron Dungan reports, some of that money will go to Arizona.
The funding will pay to reduce wildfire risk, restore habitat, manage watersheds, and improve wildlife migration corridors. Some of it will go to BLM lands in northwest Arizona, north of the Grand Canyon. The agency will also invest nearly $10 million to protect Sky Island country in southeast Arizona, including portions of the San Pedro River. Tracy Stone Manning is director of the BLM.
It's going to protect critical wildlife habitat corridors between the islands. And then it's also going to take care of some long-standing cattle trespass issues we've had in the San Pedro Riparian National Conservation Area.
The work will be funded by the Inflation Reduction Act and includes lands in southern Utah along the northern Arizona border. Ron Dungan, KJZZ News, Phoenix.
Although more than 4/5 of diabetes cases in pregnant females develop during pregnancy, studies show pre-pregnancy diabetes mellitus, or PDM, poses a greater risk for mothers and infants. A new study by the National Center for Health Statistics shows those cases have been rising steadily. From KJZZ's Arizona Science Desk, Nicholas Gervis reports.
Rates rose steadily over the 5-year study, which began in 2016. The first-year PDM appeared on the U.S. Standard Certificate of Live Birth. By 2021, the rate in Arizona had risen 38%, compared to an overall U.S. rise of 27%. PDM increased with age and BMI. The rate for American Indian or Alaska Native mothers, the group with the highest PDM rate, more than tripled that of white mothers. PDM affects 1 to 2% of U.S. pregnancies annually. It is linked to higher risks of maternal hypertensive disorders and cesarean delivery, and puts infants at greater risk of serious health problems, fetal death, and birth defects.
It's sunshine in Phoenix. We topped out near 94 yesterday. We will drop to 91 today, and we should be back to the low 100s by Sunday and Monday. It is 77 right now in Phoenix at 9:08.
The show on 91.5. I'm Phil Lansky, for Lauren Gilbert. And coming up, summer reading recommendations to kick off GPT. But first, our recent article in the Dallas-based D Magazine addressed the gradual deheating of jalapeno peppers in recent years. The piece points to consumer taste, a hardier fruit for shipping, and larger virus-free peppers as a cause. Ultimately, most jalapenos processes for canning, and they want mild peppers so they can add heat to them later. This phenomenon did not go unacknowledged by our staff, so we invited Ken Sweat to talk about it with us. Sweat is professor at the School of Mathematical and Natural Sciences at ASU. He's done extensive research. Store-bought, some homegrown. Executive producer Amy Silverman's garden.
We have 2 different jalapeno peppers here, one from the Burger and one from my executive producer's garden. They look very different, first of all, like the grocery store pepper. A little bit dry and mostly red by now, which happens to peppers I know are growing them in the garden.
Right.
So we've got a little experiment.
Key card
yourself limited in what you are able to achieve from a spiritual perspective. So, they were calling on God, they were going through the motions, they were doing the routine. And the question is raised at the beginning of verse 5, is it a fast like this which I choose? Not the one you want, but the one I choose. In other words, you've given it your own definition. You've come about, you're doing this your way and not the way that I demand, expect, and require.
Dr. Evans will come back with a simple illustration from the world of sports when he continues our look at fasting in just a moment. First, though, today's lesson is part of a brand new message collection called The Return, focusing on creating in you and me the kind of believer God wants us to be. In this 13-part series, Dr. Evans explores the many different ways we can bring ourselves back into a closer connection with God and others, increasing our effectiveness as believers who have a vital role to play in God's kingdom. As we benefit those around us in God's name, we become people who make a difference in the world rather than someone who is merely overrun by it. We want you to have this powerful 2-volume collection of full-length CDs or digital downloads as our thank you gift when you make a contribution toward Tony's ministry. And when you do, we'll also send you, as an extra bonus, a copy of his insightful booklet, The Grace of God. Just visit tonyevans.org to request your copy of The Return and The Grace of God. We have a link right on the homepage to make it easy. That's tonyevans.org, or give us a call at 1-800-800-3222, where one of our team members is ready to help with your request. That's 1-800-800-3222. Well, Dr. Evans will return with more of today's message right after this.
These days, everything seems more expensive. At the Tony Evans Training Center, we go against the grain to bring you education on the Word of God. That's why we're lowering our monthly fee. Our users are just as excited as we are. Susan says, I've been looking for a personal pace study, and TETC is an answer to my prayers. Today's reduced subscription announcement was confirmation to dive in and do it. Visit TonyEvansTraining.org to subscribe today and explore the kingdom.
In baseball, there's the first base, second base, and the third base, and the goal is home plate. Because when you hit home plate, you score. So the idea is to be able to round the basis of fasting so that when you have completed it, you have scored heaven invading history. So first base, the place that you go first in the fast that he chooses, continuing in verse 5, is it for bowing one's head like a reed and for spreading out sackcloth and ashes as a bed? Will you call this a fast, even an acceptable day to the Lord? So the first thing you got to do, you got to have an acceptable time, an acceptable, concentrated prayer time that includes giving up the physical for the spiritual, because heaven on earth is spiritually humbling ourselves before God. He calls it humble yourself, sackcloth and ashes, which is the posture of repentance. In other words, he says, if you want my attention from heaven, you must be willing to address sin in your life. Sackcloth and ashes, humbling yourself. In other words,
any amendment passing is almost zero, because they know that this is a very delicately negotiated compromise. If they were to add things or strip things at the last minute, it would completely upset the apple cart here. And it would also have to go back to the House, because the House has already passed it. And so if they were to make changes in the Senate, it would ping pong back. And they don't have a lot of time to do that, because June 5th is the date that the Treasury Secretary estimates that the United States will begin to run out of cash to pay its bills. But that being said, the Democratic leadership and Republican leadership in the Senate knows that they need the cooperation of all of their members in order to be able to speed up this process, because the Senate is notoriously slow. They can really throw a wrench into things. And so in order to speed up the process, and in exchange for members' cooperation on a time agreement, they are going to at least offer amendment votes. So Democrats and Republicans alike are going to get the opportunity to at least vote on preferred amendments and at least be able to go on the record either opposing something like the Mountain Valley Pipeline or in support of something. So that is something that the leadership is working out as a deal as they're going forward. But the expectation is that they will be able to get this done, and hopefully, for the country's sake, for all of our sake, especially the reporters who've been there every minute, every twist and turn, that they will get this done before the weekend.
So if this gets done, the president won't face another debt ceiling battle before the election. But what does something like the Mountain Valley Pipeline mean for his climate change policy and people who are really concerned about that?
I mean, that is a concern, and that's why there's been resistance to that pipeline project from the get-go. But for Joe Manchin, this could be a huge political boon for him in his state of West Virginia, a red state where he hasn't announced whether he's running for re-election yet in 2024. But it is pretty interesting that he was able to finally get this pet project in there. He'd been pushing for it for many years. But in terms of the debt ceiling fight, Biden is not going to have to worry about this, at least in his first term. It might be something that comes around in 2025 again. But I do think there's a broader question here about, and a broader concern about the normalization of negotiating over the debt ceiling in a divided government. It's a dangerous place to be. It's not the first time we have seen this. This has happened before. In 2011, for example, when President Obama was in office and there was divided government, they negotiated over this. And they also had to work out a deal that involved the budget and spending. But there's concern about the precedent that this really sets, and that anytime you have a divided government, one of the parties can use the debt ceiling as a hostage. And so I think a conversation you will see going forward is whether they should try to eliminate the debt ceiling altogether, because this is a concern and it's something that could come back to bite Republicans in the future.
Well, and briefly, Melanie, McCarthy, as you said, went into this vote confident it would pass, but there are some members of his party who are upset with the concessions he made to the White House. What do you make of the rumored threats to his speakership?
There are a handful of conservatives who are furious over the deal making that he had, and they have threatened to try to remove him from office. But I will tell you, there's not a huge appetite, even among the House Freedom Caucus, which is the conservative hardline caucus, to push him out. It's certainly something we're watching. It's something Kevin McCarthy is watching. He's not going to take anything for granted. But he's been through this rodeo before. It took him 15 rounds to become speaker, but he's squashed a rebellion once, and I think he's confident he can do it again.
That's CNN Capitol Hill reporter Melanie Sonona. Melanie, thanks.
Thank you.
Coming up, writer Rachel Louise Snyder. In her new memoir, she explores what it means to survive the unimaginable. That's up next.
Days away from the U.S. defaulting on its debt for the very first time. Unless Congress can agree on how to avoid that, we'll have the latest on the debt ceiling deal. Plus, with grilling season upon us, the ever reinventing herself Here and Now chef Kathy Gunst has new recipes and tips. That's next time, Here and Now.
Today at noon here on NPR 89.1.
Good morning, 19 minutes after 9 o'clock on a Thursday. Thanks for being a part of the pre-recorded 1A program on NPR 89.1. This week on Away with Words, hear about the art of the invitation and how it can be tricky. If you want someone to join your group on an outing, it's important to state it clearly. Otherwise, the person may wonder whether to stay at home or come along for the fun. One listener had such a misunderstanding, and it went on for months. Plus, hear advice on writing fiction. George Saunders, winner of the Booker Prize, says that some of the best advice about crafting a story comes from Dr. Seuss. Listen for Away with Words, Sunday afternoon at 2 on NPR 89.1. Dry conditions will continue into the weekend with below seasonal average temperatures through Saturday before warmer temperatures return Sunday. Increasing clouds for Tucson today with a high near 88, mostly cloudy tonight before gradually becoming clear with a low around 59 degrees. It's 76 in Midtown Tucson, 69 in Sierra Vista at 9:20.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from Data IQ, a platform for everyday AI. to help organizations make AI part of their daily business. Designed to elevate people, teams, and companies. DATAIKU.com. From the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people. And from the William T. Grant Foundation, supporting research to improve the lives of young people at WTGrantFDN.org.
I'm Jen White. This is 1A. There's never a right time to lose a parent, but losing a parent at a young age can mean a lifetime of searching for ways to fill a hole that never gets smaller. In her memoir, Women We Buried, Women We Burned, writer and journalist Rachel Louise Snyder recounts the rupturing of her life following the death of her mother when she was 8 years old. She begins to fill the hole left by her mother's absence with rage. She rebels against her evangelical Christian father and stepmother. She flunks out of high school and finds herself homeless. In Snyder's odyssey from a troubled teen in a Chicago suburb to a reporter covering violence and genocide around the world, she seeks, she loses, but she also discovers. At the heart of the book is a set of questions. How do we survive the losses that have made us who we are? And how do we not fill the holes created by loss, but learn to live around them? Rachel Louise Snyder is the author of several books, including No Visible Bruises, What We Don't Know About Domestic Violence Can Kill Us. She's also a professor in the Department of Literature at American University, the university that licenses our station. And she joins me now from Chicago to talk about her new memoir, Women We Buried, Women We Burned. Rachel, it's such a pleasure to have you.
Thank you. I'm just thrilled to be here.
There is so much in this book. It's partly about your religious upbringing and your rebellion against it, but it's also about searching for an identity and how you found one, traveling the world and reporting on what you saw. And of course, as I said, it's about your mother. First, what was your mother's name?
Gail. Gail Marjorie Lee Snyder.
What has writing this book meant for how you see the trajectory of your life?
You know, that's interesting because life is, this kind of shapeless, wandering. We don't really understand life until we look backwards, right? It's that old Kierkegaard quote of life is lived forward but understood backwards. But a memoir is sort of different. Like a memoir has to have a shape to it. It has to feel like a beginning, a middle, and an end in some sense, even though, of course, the life of that memoir is still going on. And I had only begun to think about my mother as a woman, right? Once I became the age she was when she was diagnosed. She was diagnosed with breast cancer when she was 30, and she died when she was 35. And I'm much older than that now. I've been really given life, so I feel like I have a gift that she was never given, I guess is one way to put it.
You've spent so many years collecting other people's stories and trying to make narrative sense of the things that happened to them. What was it like casting that eye on yourself?
That's a good question. I think a lot of people have asked me, like, why did you wait so long to write this book? And I always knew that I had a story. I mean, I always knew I had this kind of unconventional, we'll call it an unconventional life. But I didn't want to be the story. I was really interested in other people's stories. And what it enabled me to do ultimately was to ask those same questions that I have been asking other people for years of myself. And my father. I mean, my father passed away at the start of COVID, but, I had many years in which to talk to him and many years in which to ponder some of the decisions that he made that I still think today are questionable.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to have you read for us a bit of the first chapter of the book.
Yes, sure. My mother was Jewish. Synagogue did not teach us to pray with faith, but my father was Christian and his church did, so I mashed the two together. My grandmother was in a freeze frame on the bed, hovering toward my mother as if she could suck the disease right out of her. I made the usual entreaties. I'll never ask God for another thing. I'll believe and I'll serve. I'll spread God's word around the whole school. My mother seemed old to me then, 35. It was only the years still to come that brought her youth into sharp focus as I myself aged toward that number. She was old and then she was young. I was young and then I was old. But another part of me is frozen forever in 1977, a girl with her young mother. Sometimes, as I watch the reel in my mind, I understand what any viewer would immediately glean, that we lose them both in that moment, the woman and the girl. I read once how trauma freezes a person in time, so that a part of them remains tethered to the person they were at the time of the trauma. Somewhere inside me, I'm forever 8 years old. Had my mother already died when I skidded to my knees praying, or had she died in the minute after? Did I see her dead or only dying? I remember her there, her breath ragged, like she had cut glass lodged in her throat. There's nothing profound about this kind of death. No honor or heroism. There's the quiet life and there's the absolute stillness of death. And what comes between is the violence, the dying itself. We think of life and death as intrinsically binary, here and then gone, alive and then dead. But there's a third category, an in-between. And dying, no matter the cause, no matter the context, always contains within it a kind of violence. It is also profoundly intimate to watch someone die. "Don't you do this to me, Gail," my grandma Irma said. "Don't you dare do this to me." My grandmother's voice had a panicked edge, a terrible hiss. Had I already prayed, or had I not yet begun? The terror of her voice might have led me to prayer. "Don't you dare do this to me, Gail." I can't breathe, my mother hissed, grasping for air. Pinpoint the violence to this second. Oxygen tubes impotent against the cancer. She'd had 2 mastectomies, a second exactly 1 year to the day after the first. Radiation, chemo, vomiting, hair loss, organs so burned from the chemotherapy they froze like a rusted engine. I can't breathe. Those were her last words. Trite, literal, her entire focus bringing into sharp relief the failure of her autonomic nervous system. Breathe. The banality haunted me, the physicality of the moment, the failure of her own biology, her final tether to this earth. Not her future and not her past, not her husband or her children, or her mother on all fours yelling at her to stay in this damn world. This is what people mean, I think, when they say we die alone. Breath, air, oxygen, and then nothing.
Thank you for reading that.
Yeah, that's intense.
Yeah. You read this passage a few days ago at the Politics and Prose bookstore here in D.C., and you had to stop to cry.
I did.
What have you learned, not just in the writing of this memoir, but also in revisiting this text as you're sharing the book with others about your own grief?
It has no edges to it. Yeah, that was a shocking moment for me because this is my 4th book. I've done lots of readings, lots of talks, and that had never happened to me before. And I think I said something to the audience like, wow, I'm learning even in this moment that it's been 45 years and I still miss my mother. I still mourn her. And in some ways, I think I even mourn her now more because I know what she's missed. You know, I know the world and the life that she's missed.
One of the things that emerges in your memoir is the story, the narrative we create around her.
Evans says it's no different with the great.
About your mother's illness and death. Your father has a different story about, especially her dad. I'm sure your grandmother, your brother, all different stories.
Humans are both physical and spiritual beings. Today, Dr. Evans looks at how satisfying your spiritual appetite is sometimes best accomplished by saying no to your physical one. Let's join him.
My whole life. I don't actually have the gene. I've been tested a bunch of times, but I still, it was like when I finally got the diagnosis, I thought, okay, let's get this over with. And the reason I didn't include it is that my experience was so different. I'm fine now. It was caught early, and it's, I mean, I've had typhoid fever, and that was way worse than breast cancer for me. And so I really think of how she suffered.
Get many more treats.
Not just physically. I saw her suffering physically, even as a child. I could see her things, and she was bloated, and she was in bed for really long periods of time throughout the years. But what I never saw was the emotional suffering that I understand now. Like, she must have been thinking, how can I take care of my children when I'm not here?
We're talking to writer and journalist.
And then again, I turned to India, where a revival is going on. And it's a revival of the Word of God, if you please. Will you listen to this?
SelectQuote.com/commercials. It's last night's laugh.
Need a car? Get started now. And
of his followers. Verse 21, that they may all be one, that they may be perfected into a unit, into a team, that they may be one. I hope I'm not cynical when I say I think some groups outside Christianity must think, behold, how they lacerate one another, how they shred one another. If there is anything that would keep me away from Christ these days if I were lost, it would be the attitude of Christians toward one another. That would do it. That would do it. I find a wonderful fellowship in this church that God has raised up. I feel affirmed and loved and warmed by the fire of your friendship, and I hope you feel it back from me. Philippians chapter 2 is Paul's addition to my thoughts here. In fact, I just picked a couple of verses that are so familiar familiar, you hardly need to turn. The 3rd and 4th verses of Philippians 2. These verses, if you put them into everyday language, would sound like what you tell children in a nursery school. Verse 3, Paul writes to the Philippians, "Do nothing from selfishness or empty conceit, but in contrast, with a humility of mind, let each of you regard one another as more important than himself. Do not merely look out for your own personal interests, but also for the interests of others." You want to pull together as a family, just obey verses 3 and 4. Stop looking for the credit. Stop looking out for what you want.
Really important.
Chapter and on it. It's the command to love one another. Remember now, these Christians are hurting. And with all due respect for people when they hurt, it is very easy to get a little thin on love. These people, verse 1, are scattered. I have been
celebrating 10 million subscriptions.
Trump aides, and 2 people. Let's get them the help.
Let's do the music now.
We'll get the ball rolling